I'm going to read some passages from a speech that the author, Muriel Spark, gave in 1970. It was later published under the title, The Desegregation of Art. And what Spark was arguing for was a movement away from socially conscious, moralizing art in which we're presented effectively with a victim narrative, and the art succeeds if we feel empathy for, if we feel sorry for the victim in the art. Now, what she wanted instead was what seems to be kind of a coldness, a kind of pulling back artistically, and not an interest in engendering empathy, but instead a sort of satirical kind of literary writing. Now, I'm going to read a few passages from this speech/essay, and then make a few points in conclusion, and in turn you can make your own comments. Spark says that we have a civilization of depicted suffering. We have in this century a marvelous tradition of socially conscious art, and especially now in the arts of drama and the novel, we see and hear everywhere the representation of a victim against the oppressor. We have a literature and an artistic culture, one might almost say a civilization of depicted suffering, whether in social life or in family life. What Spark wants to do is put in place of this, quote, literature of sentiment and emotion, end quote, something else, as I said, something sort of sharper and more satirical. She feels that the socially conscious art isn't achieving its ends or illuminating our lives anymore. And one reason for that is because she feels that when people, for example, read a novel or see a movie or watch a play in which they empathize with a character in a sort of politically admirable, socially admirable kind of way, you know, in a way that other people find worthy or admirable, what people call these days virtue signaling. What they do as they go through this process, which from their point of view, from their conscious point of view, is quite genuine and a sort of demonstration of their humanity. What they do instead is that they, quote, feel that their moral responsibilities are sufficiently fulfilled by the emotions they have been induced to feel, end of quote. In other words, it's not so much that the people who empathize when they watch socially conscious art or read it are fake or phony. The point instead is that they don't actually do anything in the world. They have this experience of empathy for a character in a book or a film, I should say movie, because I'm including like streaming services, whatever we have now in the 21st century. And once we go through that process of empathizing and feeling some emotion, we ourselves have had an interesting experience, but we've changed nothing in the world. And furthermore, there is another effect wherever there is a cult of the victim. Quote, such being human nature, there will be an obliging cult of 20 equivalent victimizers, end quote. In other words, we don't change anything in reality. We fool ourselves into thinking that we are changing the world for the better. And so Spark recommends, quote, our noble aspirations, our sympathies, our elevated feelings should not be inspired merely by visits to an art gallery, a theater, or by reading a book, but rather the rhetoric of our times should persuade us to contemplate the ridiculous nature of the reality before us and teach us to mock it. We should know ourselves better by now than to be under the illusion that we are all essentially aspiring, affectionate, and loving creatures. We do have these qualities, but we are aggressive too. And so when I speak of the desegregation of art, I mean by this the liberation of our minds from the comfortable cells of lofty sentiment in which they are confined and never really satisfied, end quote. So what Spark is basically recommending is that we be honest with ourselves, be honest that we too are complicated creatures, that we too are not just purely empathetic in nature, but we have aspects of selfish or perhaps even cruelty, certainly aggressiveness in our personalities. And she is also arguing that I think the art that tries to uplift us morally is sort of having counterintuitively, is having the opposite effect. It's not making the world a more moral place. It just means that people are self-congratulating for reading books, seeing movies that give them this moral, empathetic experience. And because they do nothing once they close the book or leave the theater, the world is actually worsening. And perhaps satire will change the world more and for the better. Your own thoughts are welcome.